right. If you're just joining us, welcome to Facilitating Group Work Online. And I have a variety of different resources prepared for you today, but I thought maybe we could just go ahead and get started with getting to know a little bit about each other. So I'm going to have you just kind of maybe type in the chat. I think that's most people's preference. But today, just to give you an idea of some of the goals that I have for our 1 hour together, I want to talk about some of the benefits of group work. I also want some very practical tips for you to navigate how to facilitate this for your online students. And then I want to talk about activities, which I also mix in there with technology for both synchronous and asynchronous courses. So I know there might be a little bit of a variety in this session together. All right, so I think most of you have found the text chat. Your name will pop up when you start typing, but if you want to tell us a little bit about what is it that you teach, or if you don't teach, what is your role at NIU? And then kind of what makes group work challenging online. So I'm going to let this go for a couple of minutes while you're typing. Also, if any of you prefer not to type in the chat, you can always turn on your microphone too. Great, I see things coming in now. So Becky works with NIU STEAM as an instructor. All right, and you're going to be doing some online synchronous learning networks, how to make those sessions more engaging and using group work. Excellent. Yes, I hope we get to talk about some of the strategies that all of you are using. Everything that I have kind of incorporated today, these are things that I've acquired from other instructors. So I always love building out my repertoire. Welcome. Ashley is the program director of the HASC Writing Center. You facilitate webinars and summer writing and research program. Excellent. Kathy, great to have you. I love that you teach synchronous and asynchronous classes. I honestly feel like a lot of people have a blend, so I wanted to make sure to address both of those aspects. Welcome, Katie. You're a PhD student in the Art and Design Education program. Yes, online group work can definitely be challenging when you have people in different time zones. Absolutely. Some students allow others to do all the work. Yes, I've heard about this. All right, I'm going to start moving through some of the slides, but please feel free to keep typing. So I just wanted to briefly talk about some of the benefits of group work, because sometimes I feel like if it proves to be too challenging or doesn't go the way that we planned, we get discouraged and then we don't offer it. So it's always good to remember the positive benefits. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list, and if you feel there's something to add to the list, please feel free to type it out in the chat or to come on the microphone. But these are, again, some of the benefits that we can expect, whether it's a traditional class or just an online session where you're trying to get people engaged. When you have group work, you know that the students are going to be hearing different voices. It's not just you lecturing. So that's a definite positive aspect. When we talk about connections, there's really three different types of connections that online learners can make. So there's going to be connections with you as their instructor. There's going to be connections between them and their coursework. And then there's going to be the connections between the learner and their peers. And I think a lot of times when we talk about group work online, we're thinking about that peer connection piece, but it can actually strengthen all three of those connections. And of course, we've got all of these up here on the board. Problem solving, students can start doing brainstorming activities. It does humanize that online element, get rid of the feeling of isolation. And of course, we're using this to facilitate collaboration. It also can serve, whether you realize it or not, to help you meet regular and substantive interaction guidelines. So RSI is both the best practice, but it's also a federal policy. And I know the screen cuts off a little bit here, but we have to, as educators, make sure that we're interacting with our students consistently. And so there are three different kind of elements to that. So it has to be initiated by the instructor. Well, if you're doing group work, then you're the one facilitating it. So it sounds like you're meeting that aspect. Frequent and consistent. This means that there's some sort of kind of pattern to when students are going to be doing this group work. And of course, focused on the course subject. So it's actually relevant to their studies. All right. So now I want to get to the kind of the meat of this, what I know most of you are most excited about. The practical tips, the strategies, even some of the technology, maybe some of the different types of group work. So it's all kind of mixed together in here. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the logistics or the pre-planning because I've realized as an educator, particularly if you're doing synchronous sessions, which it sounds like a lot of you are, um, you know you have a certain amount of time with your students and it goes by quickly, and all of a sudden you'll realize you're at the end of the session and you didn't get through everything that you had hoped. So I wanted to talk about some of these things that we can set up ahead of time for our students so that we can maximize that time that we have together with our students. When it comes to group work, of course, when I say detailed instructions, I'm sure you're already nodding your head. But another way to think about this is to give your students basically a checklist or a grading rubric ahead of time so they can mark off whether or not they've completed all of the steps necessary for the group work to truly be effective. Now, I also like to think about assigning tasks ahead of time. Now, I've heard a couple of different complaints about this. For instance, maybe you want to assign groups and then somebody has an emergency. Well, then all of your pre-planning goes out the window. Not necessarily. There's different ways that we can tackle it, which I have coming up next. I've also heard that if you assign groups, maybe some people do more work than others. Again, I also have another slide for that as well. One of my mentors also tells me that, especially with online students, if you don't have due dates and if you don't have some type of incentive, everything will appear as an optional activity. So you want to make sure that you have due dates for your group work, which includes giving your students enough turnaround time to actually complete the work. Um, Ideally, maybe a week. And I know there's some fluctuation with that, but if you have students in different time zones, or if you know you have a lot of working adults, then you want to make sure that you build in enough time for them to collaborate. The incentive, it could be the very fact that the group work is graded, or it could be something such as in order to progress to the next graded assignment, you have to complete this group work and demonstrate your completion by doing X, Y, and Z. So I do think due dates and incentive oftentimes are kind of interconnected. And last but not least, I want to collect student feedback. And sometimes these even take on the form of student evaluations. And all right. Now I promised I would give you some actual examples. So this is something that can work really well for a course, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. I gave you a very basic sample task, right? Um, you're going to ask students to provide a solution for two open-ended questions, and they're going to prepare a PowerPoint slide deck outlining your rationale. Now, the sample that I have on the screen for you right now, it has tentatively 3 students per group. Could it vary? Absolutely. Um, but you've given specific tasks. Question 1 is going to have a group leader. Question 2 is going to have a group leader. And then the third person is going to be the PowerPoint presenter or coordinator. Would you ideally have some more criteria for each of those roles? Absolutely. But I think you get the idea here. Now, somebody had mentioned earlier, oh, students will allow other students to do all the work. Well, here's a kind of a fun way to get them kind of talking to each other as well as outlining their roles. So the question 1 group leader could be any of these, kind of sample criteria. Now, I had fun with this list. There's, and probably countless tasks that you could come up with or kind of criteria for those tasks. You could say the person who currently lives furthest from campus is going to be the group 1 leader. Well, the group 1 leader may actually have to be a tiebreaker. If, person 2 and person 3 each come up with a different answer, that group leader is going to have to resolve the issue. Same thing for question number 2. Okay, whoever's the group leader for that, maybe that's going to be the person who drank the most cups of coffee that day. So, an advantage to assigning tasks like this is that, if somebody calls off class at the last minute, you haven't, outlined very specific names to each task. But you've also asked students to get to know each other. Whether this is synchronous or asynchronous, students have to reach out to each other and they have to start talking. They have to figure out who lives the furthest from campus or who drank the most cups of coffee. So a nice advantage to this type of activity is that you've also built in icebreakers. That makes sense? Okay, hearing no objections. I also like to collect student evaluations. Now, this is something that was actually used in a course that I was enrolled in not too long ago. So this is kind of my inspiration for it. And it worked really well. You're going to tell students at the time of the group activity that they're going to be evaluating their group members. This is a great way to incentivize students. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this with technology, which I'll also come back to at the end of this workshop, but it's very simple. The idea is that they're going to fill out an evaluation for every single group member that they worked with. So they'll fill in the name, and then you're going to give them a survey. I like to give them surveys with specific numbers or a Likert scale so that they actually have to give a thorough evaluation. Okay. So did their group member meet their deadlines? Did they complete the assigned tasks as noted on the grading rubric? And did they work well as team members? Did they communicate clearly? And then there's an optional box for comments that go only to the instructor. When you do this, you can kind of think about how you want to incorporate this into the grade. I've seen it go both ways, so that's kind of the second part that you see on the slide. I've seen instructors say, I will take into consideration these evaluations as I assign individual grades. Or you could say that the peer scores will be calculated into your final individual grade. So in this example, the sample student earned, I think it's 8 out of 9 possible points. So this is a good way to help keep students motivated and honest. All right. Now, I know a lot of people want to know practical tips for synchronous breakout rooms. I think that's oftentimes kind of synonymous with group work. So I did want to make sure to address that. I've learned that sometimes we lose time with our students in some of the most unexpected places. So these are some things that you can do ahead of time to make sure that you get to spend as much time actually working with your students or letting them work amongst themselves as possible. So you're going to want to make sure that you plan those collaborative activities ahead of time. It's a great idea to post an agenda for your students at the start of the session so that they know what they'll be doing and roughly how much time is allotted per activity. I also recommend that you log into your web conferencing tool of choice a little bit ahead of time before your students get there, just to make sure that everything's up and working. Once your students join you, this is the kind of your opportunity to create those breakout groups, assign students to each of the groups, and then run the activities. Of course, at the end, you're going to have to conclude those breakout groups, and ideally, you want to come back together as a whole class to debrief. Now, knowing that's the ideal way that things will run, here's a couple of things to help you get going. I recommend first and foremost, test out your platform. If you're not comfortable with your web conferencing session, or if you're not really sure like what you can do with the controls, maybe test it out ahead of time. You can always contact Seidel. We're happy to kind of run sample sessions with you so that you get acclimated to where all the controls are. That pre-planning part, that again goes towards what do I want to do? What are the students going to do? How much time do I need per activity? And then the third one, I think, is the most underrated one here. Create shareable documents. As a student, I've realized that a lot of times I'll come into a classroom and then it's a synchronous session, and then we'll get into breakout groups. But we have to return to the course and look through modules and folders to find the documents that we need in our breakout groups. And this actually takes up an abundance of time. We're all scrambling, trying to open things on our computers. We have 1,000 tabs open. If you can create shareable documents and just drop them into the chat as a link, it's going to save your students a lot of time and they'll be able to focus on the work right away. I know there's this temptation, you always want to record sessions. Just be aware that when you put students into your breakout groups, it does not record the breakout sessions. So when you come back together as a full class and you're doing that session about debriefing, you're going to have to hit the record button again. All right. So these were my quick tips that I have for you. And I promise, more technology tips for you at the end here. Um, but if at all possible, I really recommend sharing links to documents in the chat. It's helpful to put them in the chat even before you hit the breakout group button. If you are recording your session, like our Zoom session right now, just be aware that cloud storage can actually be limited. So it's helpful, particularly if you have a long class session that you're trying to record. I recommend that you record it to your local device. That way you won't accidentally bump into that storage limit. Again, as I mentioned before, your breakout room activity is not recorded. So you have to remember to resume recording after you come back from breakout rooms. So that is something to remind your students about. If they can't attend class, just be aware that you can't give them a recording of the breakout sessions. More incentive for them to join you. Okay, so now we get to the fun part, the types of activities. And I was actually thinking about putting some of you into these activities, but actually at the time that I created this, we didn't have very many people registered. So I do apologize for that. Now, there are definitely more than what is on this list. So I tried to keep it kind of scaled down to something that I think you could use synchronously or asynchronously. And if you want to know how to maybe modify this, please feel free to reach out. I love the four corners or more debate. So you can do this again in whatever platform you prefer. If you like Collaborate, if you like Zoom, if you like Microsoft Teams, it'll work in all of them. So a great way to start this activity is you're going to ask your students to self-enroll in a breakout group. So number one would be strongly agree, mostly agree with exceptions is breakout room number two, somewhat disagree is breakout group three, and then breakout group four is strongly disagree. And you can use this whether it's just a nice icebreaker to get them excited about class, or it could be, something directly related to your course content. So I gave you some examples up here. Um, Public schools should never ban books. And we have some examples: To Kill a Mockingbird, Where the Sidewalk Ends, The Hunger Games. I found out these are all frequently banned books. And you would ask your students to join a group based on their response. Do they strongly agree with that statement or strongly disagree? Maybe somewhere in the middle. And then they can have a discussion once they get into a group. Now, an advantage about this is sometimes people will arrive at the same answer for very different reasons. And so you as an instructor can pop into all the different groups. Peer editing and feedback. I also have some technology tips for this, but I'm a big fan of asking students to give other students feedback. Not every instructor likes to do this. They feel that it can perpetuate misinformation. But I do think it can be done and done well as long as you think about this ahead of time. So whether this is synchronous or asynchronous, one of the first things to getting students to give feedback is you have to give them very specific criteria. Again, I always go back to that rubric. But there are things that you can do to help students answer accordingly. So as an English instructor, if I asked my students to give feedback on an essay, of course, a lot of them might be tempted to say something like, "Oh, I really like your paper. It's good." That isn't necessarily productive. So instead, I might give my students a set of questions that they have to answer every time they trade papers. I might ask them to identify the thesis statement. I might ask them to identify the single strongest statement. I might ask them to find the weakest sentence. And students really get involved when they get specific feedback and they're invested in, oh, what is my best sentence versus, oh, what needs the most revision? You can also set a timer, and this ensures that everybody is spending the same amount of time on each paper. So kind of like musical chairs. I really like this one, problem solving. And so a lot of times I'll call this worksheets because they can take on so many different functions. Okay. I I encourage you to try to use shareable documents, and I do have some suggestions for that. You can either save documents into the shared drive, or you could even use Google Docs. It really just depends on your personal preference and your comfort level with technology. Some people have a strong preference for one or the other, but they both work well. So the idea is that you've created a worksheet and students can fill it out kind of in live time. And then they don't even have to hit submit. They don't have to go and turn it in to a discussion board or to an assignment in Blackboard because you've created an interactive worksheet for your students. You'll be able to see it. It's saved in your files and you can see their progress. Another way to help students get kind of incentivized is give them a race to completion. Each of the groups is competing against the other groups. Who's going to complete the worksheet? And, of course, we're hoping for accuracy, right? So who can complete it and fill it out with as much accuracy as possible and return to the main room first. So this is again a great competition for students. This is my example of different types of worksheets that you can use. This is not specific to any discipline whatsoever. So I've seen it go a wide variety of different directions. You could have essay, fill in the blank, equations, graphs, PowerPoints, flowcharts, and so much more. I watched one instructor create an entire worksheet where there were about 12 different questions on the page. Some of them were word jumbles, some of them were mathematical equations, some of them were word problems. And when students were in their groups, they could pick and choose which question they wanted to answer first. But ultimately, there was a clue embedded in each of the questions, and it would solve a riddle once they got all of the questions answered. This one is a nice segue from just breakout groups. This still works very well in the synchronous sessions. Um, I think sometimes faculty are upset that students are trying to Google answers and things like that. So this is a low-tech option. We could do it right now in our session together. You're going to ask students to answer a question. You're going to set a timer. You're going to give them a very short amount of time in which to answer the question. Um, so these were some of my examples. You know, what is your culture? How do you define rhetoric? And then tell students to type their original responses in the web conferencing chat tool, but don't post it until you say post now. And when you say post now, everybody's responses come in all at the exact same time. So there's not enough time for them to Google their answers. They're not piggybacking off of somebody else's existing answer. And so they all just come in all at the same time. Okay. I'm a big fan of escape rooms. I don't know if any of you were able to try this, particularly during the pandemic. They got a lot of popularity then. So I was bound and determined to see how difficult it was. You can make it difficult, you can make it extremely simple. It's just all about the time and energy you wish to invest in it. I found it easiest to use Google Forms and you can create customized learning paths. So this is actually a screenshot from mine. I had a plant apocalypse. There were killer plants. But anyway, it was this idea that I would ask my students a question. I could do any theme that I wanted. And if they got the answer right, then they could progress to a harder or different type of question. If they got the question wrong, then I could direct them to a similar question until they demonstrated mastery of that particular concept. And it auto grades for the students. So again, this is a great thing that you can ask them to do in groups or as individuals, but they'll know immediately at the end of their escape room what they received for a score, and it'll flag what questions they need to review. I did not come up with this idea. I saw so many tutorials. This one was probably one of my favorites. If you want, I am happy to share this link with you in an email after this workshop. But this was actually created by librarians at the height of the pandemic. Uh, they created a digital escape room, and every question was a different type of logic. You know, maybe they were asking them about money, but it had a Hogwarts theme or a Harry Potter theme. And so here's a little bit of the history up on the screen. Little did we know that over the next 2 years, the game would be played by 225,000 users from over 22 countries across the globe, including Australia, New Zealand, India, Germany, South Africa, and more, and it's been translated into 7 different languages. So they had no idea that what they were doing was going to catch on like wildfire, but they they've even created tutorials for you on how you can do the same thing. So it does go back a little bit to pre-planning. This is something you would have to do, obviously, well in advance before class starts. Okay. I want to see if we can save a little bit of time at the end here for a discussion on types of activities you're doing. So I did just want to talk about technology because I think another aspect to this idea of facilitating group work is that you're kind of controlling the technology. So I have a couple of different options for you. Blackboard Forms is great. They finally added this. It's basically like a way for you to use surveys in your course. So you can assign points to it. So if it's graded, that would be a wonderful option for peer evaluations. Um, if you don't want it to be graded, then you can just use this to get periodic feedback from your students. You know, how is this activity going? They can rank it, on a scale of like 1 to 5. I like to give them numerous attempts, particularly if you are using Blackboard Forms to collect peer evaluations during these group activities, right? If you put them in a group of 4, then you need to, of course, give them, 3 attempts, one for each of the other 3 group members that they'll be evaluating. And if this is going to be a graded activity, make sure to not click the button for anonymous. As far as creating shareable documents go, so I have some screenshots and some step-by-step instructions for you in these slides. But again, if you just want to go at a slower pace, please feel free to reach out to me after the workshop and we can go at and look at your account together. So this is just the NIU website, niu.edu, and under the quick links at the top of the page, you'll see Office 365. So that's where you go to create these shareable documents. From the quick links, you're going to go to Office 365, click on OneDrive, My Files, and you can add a new one. You can either just create a new document, or if you've already typed one up on your computer, you can just upload it. You're like, well, why would I put it in the shared drive? Well, when you put it in the shared drive, you have these options for settings. You can click the ellipses or the 3 dots, and you're going to click share with anyone. And I don't know if you can see it or not here. The yellow isn't maybe the best highlighting choice, but I highlighted where it said that people can edit. Well, if you create a document and you want your students to type on it, then you need to give them editing privileges. One other thing that I like to do with these documents is I like to kind of do an inventory before class starts. I'm going to look and see how many people are enrolled in my course. Roughly, how many groups do I think I'm going to divide my students into that particular class period or for that particular project? If I know I'm going to have probably 5 groups, I'm going to save this exact same document and I'm going to label it as group 1. And then I'm going to save it again. I'm going to label it group 2. And I'm going to keep doing that for all 5 groups. And so that way I have 5 shareable links. I can drop them in the text chat. They're identical documents, but they're labeled for each group. So when I put my students in breakout groups, they know what number they're in. I'll I'll look at the screen and I'll say, oh, I'm in breakout group 3. Well, then I have to click the link that says worksheet number 3. I also really like to use the Blackboard peer review. And sometimes this particular Blackboard functionality can appear a little bit confusing the first time you look at it. But it has kind of some of that built-in incentive that I think we were talking about earlier. So when you create an assignment in Blackboard, one of the first things you can do in the top right corner is you'll click on a gear icon. So that's step number one. Step number two, you scroll down and you click the box that says peer review, and then you click the link that says select peer settings. And that brings you to your third and final kind of setting option. You determine how many reviews per student are going to take place. So, maybe I want them to get 3 different sets of feedback. So I selected 3 reviews. And then I have 2 different due dates below it. So there's the assessment due date. Students have to submit their work by a certain day and time. So on this particular example, I selected November 20th by 11:59 p.m. I had mentioned my background was in teaching English, so maybe I would say that the rough draft is due by November 20th at 11:59 p.m. Then what happens is students will be randomly assigned 3 different peer papers to review. And you'll notice that's the second date listed. That's for November 26th. And that's also for 11:59 p.m. Now, the nice part about doing this through Blackboard is that students can't just review other people's work unless they've already submitted their own original submission. So if they didn't turn something in on 11:20, then they are not able to review other people's work. So again, it's a lot of that incentive that students need to actively participate in the group, and they need to adhere to those due dates. Students will not be able to see who is providing their peer reviews. It will be anonymous from their perspective. As an instructor in the grade book, you can monitor everything. So you're going to know if, Kathy turned something in as an instructor, you'll be able to see that maybe Ashley and Katie were the ones who reviewed it. All right. And last but not least, I always just like to give you some ideas about technology that are free, maybe not necessarily in Blackboard. We also have Poll Anywhere. This is a fun way to get your students excited and participating as a group. Poll Anywhere, you can ask them questions, maybe about their homework, and have them submit an answer. And you can post the results in class. This is great exercise, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. Give them a deadline. Say, hey, your answer is due by this day and time. And then you could even post the results in Blackboard. So I do like to use technology in fun, creative new ways, but at the same time, I want to use it mindfully. I don't want to overwhelm students. I don't want to overwhelm myself either. So last but not least, anytime you're going to do group work, you just got to establish that communication plan. So ask your students some questions, what's going to work for them? Are they going to be communicating as a group in web conferencing sessions? Are they going to be maybe just trying to call each other? Or can this be something that's done asynchronously, maybe even through email? So some of this is going to be obviously very individual and based on your unique course dynamics. Okay, so we have plenty of time for Q&A. I am happy to answer any questions, but I'd also love to hear from any of you. Are there any strategies that you're using for groups that you're particularly fond of? All right. Well, if anyone's feeling shy, I'll go ahead and I'll stop the recording.